He took her hand the moment she stepped down from the wagon, gentle, steady, the way a man holds something he is afraid of losing. Then she looked up and saw it. A stone mansion rising above the valley. Hundreds of acres stretching in every direction. Workers stopping mid-step, pulling their hats from their heads, murmuring Mrs. Thornton, like the name, had always belonged here. She turned and looked at the man still holding her hand. The man she had married this morning, in a worn coat and dusty boots. Caleb. Her voice was barely a sound. What is this? He did not let go of her hand. Home, he said quietly. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. We want to see how far this story has traveled. Montana Territory. 1887. Elizabeth Harper had made a lot of hard decisions in her 28 years of living. She had walked away from a dying town. She had buried her mother with money borrowed from a neighbor who never let her forget it. She had taken work that bent her back and scraped her knees and left her hands raw in the winter. She had done all of that without asking for help, because asking for help meant owing something, and Elizabeth Harper did not like owing anything to anyone. But, sitting in the back corner of Mrs. Calloway's boarding house in Blackridge, Montana, reading a newspaper advertisement for the third time in a row, she understood that the decisions she had made to survive until now were small compared to what she was about to consider. The advertisement was short, barely 10 lines. Ranch owner seeks a capable woman for marriage. Honest work, steady home, no pretense. Interested parties may write to see Thornton, Blackridge County. That was all. No promises about love. No descriptions of a handsome man with a fortune waiting. Just 2 sentences that read like a man listing tools he needed for a job he had to finish. Elizabeth read it again. Honest work, steady home. She folded the newspaper and looked out the window at the gray Montana sky. Mrs. Calloway had told her that morning, with the particular softness of a woman delivering bad news she had been rehearsing, that the room would need to be available by the end of the week. The mining company had sent new supervisors. Supervisors had wives. Wives needed rooms. Elizabeth did not fit into that equation anymore. She had $4.60 in her coat pocket. She had no family within 300 miles. She had a pair of good boots, a winter dress, a summer dress, and a set of skills that included cooking, bookkeeping, mending, cleaning, and the ability to stretch a meal for 6 people out of ingredients meant for 3. What she did not have was a plan. She went to the post office the next morning and wrote a letter to C. Thornton of Blackridge County. She kept it short. She listed what she could do. She did not beg. She did not describe herself as anything other than what she was. A working woman with no family, no property, and no patience for dishonesty. His response arrived 4 days later. It was even shorter than her letter. If you are willing to work, come Thursday. Church at noon. C. Thornton, that was all. No greeting, no pleasantries. No attempt to make himself sound like a better prospect than he probably was. Elizabeth read it standing at the post office counter, and something about its flatness made her trust it more than a page of careful promises would have. She packed her bag Thursday morning and walked to the church. He was already there when she arrived. She had expected something. She was not sure what. Most women she knew who had met their husbands through advertisements described the moment with a kind of cautious hope. The way you approach a door when you do not know what is on the other side. Elizabeth had told herself she was beyond that kind of hoping. She was there for a roof and a purpose, nothing else. But she still looked. Caleb Thornton was tall. That was the first thing she registered. Tall and broad across the shoulders in the way of men who worked with their hands every day, not men who paid other people to work for them. His coat was brown, worn at the elbows, clean but not new. His boots were dusty. His hat was pulled low in the way of a man who was not interested in being seen too closely. He stood at the church steps with his arms at his sides, not leaning against the railing, not fidgeting, just standing still in a way that made him look like he had been planted there. He watched her walk across the street. He did not smile. He did not come forward to take her bag. He just watched. The way you watch a thunderstorm rolling in over a ridge, with a kind of attentive neutrality that tells you nothing about what he is feeling. "Miss Harper," he said. "Mr. Thornton," she said. That was their introduction. The minister was a small, nervous man who clearly wanted the ceremony over before he had to make any more small talk with Caleb Thornton. He moved through the words quickly and quietly. Elizabeth answered when she was supposed to answer. Caleb answered when he was supposed to answer. Nobody in the church cried, because nobody in the church knew either of them well enough to feel anything about what was happening. When it was done, Caleb picked up her travel bag before she could stop him. "Wagon is out back," he said. She followed him. The wagon was old but solid. A single horse, well-fed and calm. Caleb loaded her bag in the back without ceremony and climbed up to the seat. Elizabeth climbed up beside him, arranged her skirts, and looked straight ahead. They rode for almost an hour before he said anything. "You cook?" he asked. "Yes." "Bookkeep?" "Some." "Any medical experience?" She turned to look at him. "You advertising for a wife or a field nurse?" He looked at her for the first time since the church. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was closer to the expression of a man who had not expected to be surprised. "Workers get hurt," he said. "Useful to know what you can manage before I take you out there." "I can manage most things," Elizabeth said. "As long as you tell me what I am walking into." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." They rode in silence again. She watched the landscape change around them. The flat brown near town gave way to rolling hills. Then to stands of pine that thickened as they moved north. The road narrowed. The air changed, cooler, cleaner. The kind of air that felt like it had traveled a long way to get here. She noticed the fencing first. Stone posts, not wood. Evenly spaced, the kind of fencing that took time and money to build properly. She had seen fences like that around wealthy properties in the East. Never out here in the territory. She told herself it meant nothing. Then she saw the workers. A group of men clearing brush from a hillside. When the wagon passed, they stopped. One of them pulled his hat from his head and held it at his chest. "Morning, Mr. Thornton." Caleb lifted 2 fingers from the reins in a brief acknowledgement and kept driving. Elizabeth looked back at the men. They had already returned to work. But the gesture stayed with her. There was nothing casual about the way that man had pulled his hat. It was not the wave of a neighbor. It was the deference of an employee who understood the difference between his position and the man in the wagon. "How many workers do you have?" she asked. "Enough," Caleb said. She decided not to push, but the road kept telling her things he was not. Another fence. Longer this time, the stone posts were cut and fitted. Not rough piled. Someone had paid a stonemason. The road they were traveling had been graded and packed, not worn naturally by wagon traffic. Someone had decided this road would be here and had made it happen. She was still turning these observations over in her mind when the wagon rounded a bend in the tree line and the valley opened up below them. She made no sound. She could not. The ranch spread across the valley floor the way a city spreads across a plain. Not just a house and some outbuildings. Barns. Multiple barns. Massive and well-maintained. Worker cottages arranged in neat rows along the tree line. Corrals where hundreds of cattle moved in the morning light. A bunkhouse long enough to sleep 40 men. Storehouses. A smithy, vegetable gardens larger than most homesteads she had seen. A natural spring feeding a channel that ran clear water through the center of the property. And at the top of the rise, overlooking everything, a stone house, not a cabin, not a farmhouse. A house built the way people in wealthy cities built houses, with a wide front porch, real glass windows, a chimney at each end, and the kind of deliberate permanence that said whoever built it intended to be here for generations. Elizabeth felt the wagon slow. She turned and looked at Caleb Thornton. He was watching the valley, the way a man watches something that belongs to him. With a quiet, careful attention that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with ownership. "What is this?" she asked. "My ranch," he said. "You told me you owned a ranch." "I do." "You did not tell me it was." She stopped. She did not have the right word. Estate was too formal. Empire felt theatrical. "You did not tell me it was this." He kept his eyes on the road below them. "You did not ask." She stared at him. "That is not an answer," she said. "It is a true one." Elizabeth felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger, not yet. Something more complicated than anger. She had walked into this marriage with her eyes open. She had known it was a transaction. She had accepted that. What she had not accepted, what she had not even imagined she would need to accept, was that the transaction had been built on something incomplete. She had agreed to marry a man with modest means and honest expectations. She had not agreed to become the wife of whoever this was. They rode down into the valley in silence. By the time the wagon rolled through the main gate, workers had begun to notice their arrival. Men stopped what they were doing. Women came to doorways. A small group of ranch hands near the first barn turned and looked. And one of them, a lean, weathered man with a silver braid of hair under his hat, walked forward and caught the horse's bridle. "Welcome home, Mr. Thornton," he said. Then he looked at Elizabeth with an expression of genuine curiosities and something she could only interpret as cautious hope. "And Mrs. Thornton. Welcome to Thornton Ranch, Mrs. Thornton." The words landed on her like stones dropped from a height. She had been Elizabeth Harper for 28 years. She had been Mrs. Thornton for approximately 90 minutes, and already the name was being used by a stranger who knew this place better than she ever would. Caleb climbed down from the wagon and came around to her side. He offered his hand. She did not take it. She climbed down on her own and stood in the dirt of the courtyard and looked around at what she had married into. "You have some explaining to do," she said, keeping her voice even. "Yes," Caleb said. "I expect I do." He picked up her bag again and walked toward the stone house. She followed because she had no idea what else to do. Inside, the house was clean and spare and well made. No clutter, no extravagance. Good furniture built to last, not built to impress. A fireplace in the main room large enough to heat the space properly. A kitchen with equipment that someone had chosen carefully. A staircase with a solid oak banister worn smooth from years of use. Caleb set her bag down in the hallway and turned to face her. "I will tell you what you want to know," he said. "Start with the truth," she said. "About all of it." He was quiet for a moment. A man choosing his words the way a carpenter chooses a board, looking for the one that will hold weight without cracking. "The ranch covers 4,000 acres, he said. "We run 2,200 head of cattle. I have 38 permanent workers and another dozen who come on for seasonal work. The spring operation alone generates enough income to." He stopped. "More than most people in Montana will see in a lifetime." Elizabeth stood very still. "And you put an advertisement in the newspaper," she said. "Like a man looking for a housekeeper." "I was looking for a wife," he said. "Why that way, why not?" She gestured broadly at the house around them. "Why not walk into any parlor in Blackridge and introduce yourself and let them see all of this? And because then they would see all of this first," he said. She stopped. The way he said it was flat and tired. The voice of a man repeating a truth he had gotten exhausted carrying. There was no self-pity in it. There was not even much emotion. Just the dry weight of experience. "They see the ranch," he said. "They see the cattle and the land and the house, and they stop seeing anything else." Elizabeth looked at him. She was trying to decide whether she was being manipulated. "So you hid it," she said. "I did not advertise it. That is hiding." "Maybe," he said. "But I needed to know that the person who came was coming because they wanted a real life, not because they wanted a wealthy life." "You should have told me," she said. "Before the ceremony." Before I agreed, if I had told you, you would not have come for the right reasons. You do not get to decide what my reasons are, she said. And her voice had an edge in it now. I am not something to be managed. Caleb looked at her. No, he said. You are not. He said it without apology but without argument, in the simple way of a man agreeing to a fact. And that, strangely, was what made her anger stop just short of boiling over. She was furious. She had the right to be furious, and he was not trying to talk her out of it. A woman appeared in the kitchen doorway, older, broad-shouldered, with the expression of someone who had been working in this house long enough to have seen most things. This is Martha, Caleb said. She manages the house. She can show you the rooms. Martha nodded at Elizabeth with a look that was impossible to read. Respectful but measuring, Mrs. Thornton, Martha said. There is hot water whenever you are ready. Elizabeth turned back to Caleb. We are not finished, she said. I know, he said. He walked toward the back of the house, and she was left standing in the hallway with Martha and her single travel bag, and the growing, settling understanding that the life she had agreed to was nothing like the life she had thought she was walking into. Martha showed her a room upstairs. Large windows. A real bed. Not a cot. A washstand with an actual china basin. A wardrobe built into the wall. The kind of room that people with money took for granted and people without money dreamed about. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. She had $4.60 this morning. She had married a man who owned 4,000 acres. She had agreed to honest work and a steady home. She had ended up in a stone mansion in a valley she had never seen, surrounded by 38 workers who called her Mrs. Thornton, married to a man who had looked her in the eye at a church altar and chosen, very deliberately, to let her believe she was marrying something small. She put her hands flat on her knees and breathed. The question was not whether she was angry. She was angry. The question was what she was going to do about it. She did not go back downstairs that evening. Martha brought her a tray with food on it. Real food. Roasted meat and root vegetables and fresh bread and a small pot of tea. Elizabeth ate alone at the window and watched the last light drain out of the valley below her. Watched the lanterns come on in the worker cottages one by one. Watched the enormous property settle into the dark like a sleeping animal. She thought about the advertisement. Honest work. Steady home. She thought about what he had said downstairs. If I had told you, you would not have come for the right reasons. She turned that sentence over and over. Because the terrible thing, the thing she could not quite bring herself to say out loud even in the privacy of her own thoughts, was that he was not entirely wrong. If she had known about the ranch, she would have come. But she would have come differently. With her guard up differently. With different expectations, different questions, different consciences. She would have come knowing she was entering a world of money and power, and everything inside her would have braced for what that world usually meant for women like her. Instead, she had come thinking she was going to work hard and build something modest alongside a difficult man, and she was not entirely sure which version of herself she trusted more. Downstairs, she heard Caleb's boots on the floor, heavy and even. She heard the front door open. She heard it close. She went to the window and saw him walking across the courtyard in the dark, toward the far barn, with a lantern in his hand. It was past 8 o'clock in the evening. He was going to check on his cattle, not because he needed to. He had 38 workers for that, because that was the kind of man he was. She did not know yet whether that made things better or worse. She went to bed and lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of a ranch settling into night. All the creaks and wind sounds and distant animal sounds of a place that had its own rhythms entirely independent of anything she brought to it. She thought, I have $4.60. She thought, I have skills, real ones. She thought, whatever this is, whatever he hid from me and whatever his reasons were, I am not going to spend a single day of my life here being kept. That was the last thought she had before she fell asleep. In the morning, she came downstairs before Martha had finished making coffee. She found Caleb at the kitchen table, with a ledger open in front of him and a pen in his hand, working through numbers with the focused attention of a man who had learned long ago that nobody else was going to get this right if he didn't. He looked up. He did not say good morning, neither did she. She poured herself coffee, sat down across the table from him, and said, "I want to see the books." He looked at her. "The ranch accounts," she said. "I told you I could bookkeep. I want to know what this operation actually looks like." He studied her for a moment. She held his gaze without flinching. He slid the ledger across the table. She pulled it toward her and opened it to the first page. The numbers were real, detailed and complex, and running across years of careful record-keeping. A cattle operation of this size had dozens of moving parts. Income from sales, expenses from feed and equipment and labor and land maintenance, seasonal fluctuations, weather losses, debt management. She had managed the books for the Blackridge boarding house for 2 years. That had been simple arithmetic compared to this, but she understood the structure immediately. She turned pages. She did not speak, she read. After a while she said, "Without looking up, your spring feed expenditure is higher than it needs to be." Silence. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him yet. Not surprise exactly. Something more careful than surprise. "I am getting that feed from Miller's," he said. "Miller's is overcharging you by about 18% compared to Hendrick's Supply in Garrison. I worked near Garrison. I know their rates." She looked back at the ledger. "At the volume you are buying, that difference is not small." He was quiet for a moment. "Hendrick's delivers this far out?" he asked. "I do not know. But it is worth finding out." He looked at her. For the first time since she had arrived, something shifted in the way he was seeing her. Not warmth. Not yet. But a kind of attention that was different from the cautious assessment he had been running on her since the church steps. "You are angry with me," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you are still looking at my ledger. I told you I could bookkeep. My feelings about you do not change what I said I could do." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then what else do you see?" She turned another page. And something that had been frozen between them, something rigid and wary on both sides, shifted the smallest amount. Not enough to matter yet, but enough to know it could move. Outside the kitchen window, Thornton Ranch was waking up. Workers were moving. Cattle were lowing. The morning light was changing over the valley. Elizabeth Harper, who had walked into a church with $4.60 and come out the other side as Mrs. Thornton, sat across from the most complicated man she had ever met and turned another page in his ledger. She did not know what came next, but she had never been the kind of woman who waited to find out. The ledger became the bridge between them, not trust. Not yet, but something functional, the way two people who do not particularly like each other can still pull a wagon out of a ditch if the wagon belongs to both of them. Every morning for the first week, Elizabeth came downstairs before Martha had finished with the coffee, sat across from Caleb at that kitchen table, and worked through the accounts. She did not ask permission. She did not announce what she was doing. She simply did it, the way she had always done the things she decided needed doing. Caleb watched her the first 2 mornings with the wariness of a man who expects a trick. By the 3rd morning, he had stopped watching and started answering her questions. By the 5th morning, he was asking her questions back. "This supplier for the winter grain," she said on the 6th day, turning the ledger toward him and tapping a line with her finger. "You have been using him for 4 years. He is reliable," Caleb said. "He is expensive, reliability costs sometimes," she said. "But his rate went up 11% last October, and you kept paying it without negotiating. That is not reliability, that is assumption. He assumes you will not push back. And you have been proving him right." Caleb looked at the line she was pointing to. He looked at it for a long moment. You think he would come down? I think you have never asked, she said. And I think a man who is moving this volume of grain would rather lower his margin than lose the contract entirely. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You want to write the letter? I want you to write the letter, she said. But yes. That afternoon he wrote it. 2 days later, the supplier responded with a rate 7% lower than the previous agreement. Not as much as Elizabeth had pushed for, but enough. Caleb set the letter on the table in front of her without saying anything. She read it. Better, she said. Not what you wanted. No. But a start, he almost smiled. It was a very small thing. A slight easing at the corners of his eyes, gone before she could be sure she had seen it. But she had seen it. She filed the letter and went back to the ledger. That was how the first week ended, not warmly, not badly. Just forward. The second week was when the ranch itself started teaching her things. Martha was the one who began it, not with any particular plan, but in the way of a woman who had been running a large household for years and recognized immediately that the new Mrs. Thornton was not going to be a passive occupant of the stone house. Martha started including her, not formally, just the small daily inclusions of a working household. Asking what she preferred for meals, whether she wanted to know the weekly supply order before it went out, where she kept finding the draft in the upstairs hallway, and whether Elizabeth had noticed it too. Elizabeth noticed everything. She walked the property on the third day. Not the fields, not the far pastures where the cattle were, but the immediate buildings around the main house. She looked at what was there, and she looked at what was missing, and she looked at the spaces in between. There was a building at the northeast corner of the property, about a quarter-mile from the main house, set back from the road that the supply wagons used. Stone walls, real ones, thick enough to have been built to last. But the roof needed significant work. The windows were boarded. The door had been nailed shut. She asked Martha about it that evening. Martha paused in the way of someone deciding how much to tell. Mr. Thornton had it built about 6 years ago, she said. When the ranch was growing faster, there was talk of taking in travelers. The road up from Garrison passes right by it. He had it fitted as a guest house. What happened? Martha resumed what she had been doing. He changed his mind. Why? Another pause. You would have to ask him. She asked him that night. They had fallen into a habit of the dinner table, not comfortable exactly, but established. They ate in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, which Martha had pointed out with quiet approval. Caleb ate fast and without much conversation. Elizabeth ate at a normal pace and asked things when she thought of them. The stone building at the northeast corner, she said. He did not look up from his plate. What about it? Martha said it was built as a guest house. It was. What happened to it? He picked up his coffee. Nothing happened to it. I decided it was not worth the trouble. A stone building with that kind of construction is always worth the trouble, she said. What was the real reason? He looked at her then. The expression was not hostile. It was the look of a man who is used to being the only person in a room who asks that particular kind of direct question. At the time, he said carefully, I did not want strangers on the property. And now? What? Is that still how you feel? He was quiet for a moment. Why are you asking? Because I am trying to understand what this place is, she said. Not just the numbers, the actual place. What it is used for. What it could be used for. He set down his cup. It is a cattle operation. It is also 4,000 acres with 38 workers, and a stone guest house, with a good roof that needs some work, and a location on a supply road that probably sees 20 wagons a week. He looked at her without expression. I am not telling you what to do with your property, she said. I am observing. You observe loudly, he said. Someone has to, she said. He did not respond to that, but she noticed he did not dismiss it either. He took his plate to the kitchen, rinsed it himself the way he always did, which had surprised her the first time she saw it, and now she had come to expect it. And he walked toward the back door. I will have someone board up the windows properly if the weather turns, he said. Without turning around. Thank you, she said. He went out. She sat at the table and thought about that building, about the road that ran past it, about the travelers who came through this part of Montana with nowhere to stop between Garrison and the next settlement. She did not say anything else about it that week, but she did not stop thinking about it either. The real education came from the workers, not from Caleb, who was generous with ledger information and careful with everything else, not from Martha, who was loyal to the household above all things, but from the men and women who ran the actual daily work of Thornton Ranch, the ones who had been here long enough to know how it worked and who had decided, one by one over that second week, that Mrs. Thornton was worth talking to. The man with the silver braid, whose name was Earl, and who managed the stables and the transport of the ranch, told her things about the supply runs that she had not seen in the accounts, routes that could be consolidated, a wagon that was reaching the end of its useful life, but that nobody had flagged because it still moved, a relationship with the Garrison freight operator that had never been formalized into a written agreement, which meant both sides were guessing at obligations and occasionally getting it wrong. An older woman named Clara, who managed the worker cottages, told her about the turnover problem. Good workers left in the late summer, year after year, because there was not enough work through the winter months to keep everyone. Caleb paid his permanent workers through the winter anyway, which was unusual and which created loyalty, but the seasonal workers, the ones who came for the big pushes, left and did not always come back. A young man named Thomas, who kept the equipment in working order, told her that 2 of the major pieces of machinery needed parts that had been on order from back east for 7 months, that the supplier kept delaying, and that nobody had gone around the supplier to find an alternative source, because it was not clear who had the authority to do that. Elizabeth listened to all of it. She listened the way she had learned to listen in 12 years of working in other people's houses, with her whole attention, and without judgment, gathering information the way you gather provisions before a long trip because you do not know yet which ones you will need. She started keeping her own notes, not in Caleb's ledger. In a small notebook she bought from her own money, what was left of her $4.60, at the supply store in Garrison when the mail wagon made its run on Wednesday. By the end of the second week, she had 3 pages of observations, questions, and ideas that she did not fully understand yet, but that she could feel were connected to something important. On Sunday evening, when Caleb came in from the late rounds and sat down at the kitchen table with his customary cup of coffee, Elizabeth sat down across from him and put her notebook on the table. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. Thomas has been waiting 7 months for equipment parts, she said. Caleb's expression shifted. He told you that? He told me. Has he told you? A pause. Not directly. Why not? Thomas is not. He manages his work. He does not typically bring problems to me unless they are urgent. 7 months is urgent, she said. He does not know that you would want to know, or he is not sure it is his place to say it. Caleb looked at the notebook. What else? She told him about the wagon, about the seasonal worker turnover, about the unformalized arrangement with the Garrison freight operator. He listened the way he did everything, quietly and completely, without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a long moment. You learned all of this in 2 weeks, he said. I talked to people. You talk to the people who report to you directly, she said. And she kept her voice even because she was not criticizing him. She was simply stating what she had observed. The ones who are used to coming to you with answers, not problems. The ones further down talk to each other. They do not always know how to get things up to you. He looked at her. This was the moment she was not sure about. This was the moment where a man who owned 4,000 acres and 38 workers and had been running this operation alone for years could decide that a woman who had been here 2 weeks had no business telling him anything about how his ranch worked. She held his gaze and waited. "What would you do about the equipment parts?" he said. She blinked. She had not expected him to start there. "I would write to 3 alternative suppliers in the East," she said. "Describe the specifications Thomas needs. Ask for availability and pricing. Send the letters this week. And the freight arrangement. Put it in writing. Both sides, it does not need to be complicated, 1 page. What each party provides and when, it removes the guesswork." He nodded slowly. "The seasonal workers are harder," she said. "That is a structural problem. People leave because winter work is thin. You cannot manufacture work. But you might be able to offer something in the lean months that keeps the best ones coming back, such as?" She hesitated. "I have an idea about that, but I need to think it through before I say it out loud." He looked at her. "You are not sure it is your place." "I am not sure it is practical," she said. "Those are different things." He almost smiled again. She was beginning to recognize the signs, the very slight softening around his eyes, the way the tension in his jaw eased just barely. "Tell me when you are ready," he said. She picked up her notebook. "There is one more thing," she said. He waited. "The guest house," she said. He was very still. "You said you would think about having it boarded up properly," she said. "But I do not think that is the right answer." "Elizabeth, I am not asking you for anything," she said quickly. "I am not asking you to fund anything or approve anything. I am asking you to let me look at it. Just look. I want to understand what it would take to make it functional." The silence between them was different from the silences she had grown used to. Those were the silences of a man who said little by nature. This one had weight in it. "Why?" he said. "Because I need something of my own," she said. She had not planned to say it that plainly, but it came out that way, and she was not sorry. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she started to wonder if she had pushed too far, said too much, moved too fast on something that needed more careful handling. "The key is on the nail by the back door," he said. She looked at him. "The guesthouse key," he said. "It has been on that nail for 6 years. Take it. Look at whatever you want to look at." She did not thank him effusively. That was not how things worked between them, and she already understood that. "All right," she said. She took the key the next morning. She stood in the doorway of that building for a long time before she stepped inside. The walls were solid. The floor was stone, swept by nobody but intact. The fireplace at the end of the main room was large enough to heat the space. And the flue, when she tested it with a bit of paper, drew cleanly. The 2 rooms off the main hall were smaller but real rooms, with windows that would let in light once they were unboarded. She walked every inch of it. She pressed her hands to the walls and looked at the ceiling, and stood in each room and tried to see what it could be rather than what it was. A man came to the doorway behind her. She turned. It was Earl, the stable manager, with his hat in his hands. "Mr. Thornton said you might be out here," he said. "Asked me to answer any questions you had about the building." She looked at him. "Did he?" "Yes, ma'am." She turned back to the room. "How often do supply wagons pass on that road?" she asked. "In the good months? Every 2-3 days on average. Sometimes more. Men coming up from Garrison, heading to the logging camps further north. Ranchers from the west side of the valley. In the autumn before the freeze, it gets busy. Is there anywhere between Garrison and the northern camps where travelers can stop? A proper stop with meals and a roof?" Earl thought about it. Hennessy's place used to take people in, but Hennessy sold up 2 years ago. The new family is not doing it. So there is nothing. "No, ma'am. Not on this stretch." She looked at the fireplace. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about 12 years of cleaning other people's rooms, and cooking other people's meals, and folding other people's clothes. And she thought about what it would feel like to do those things in a place that answered to her. She thought about what she had said to Caleb the previous night. "I need something of my own." She had $4.20 left in her coat pocket. She had a husband who had given her a key without asking what she planned to do with it. She had skills that nobody in this valley had yet thought to apply to this particular problem. And she had an idea that was beginning to feel less like an idea and more like a plan. She did not know yet whether it was practical. She had told Caleb she needed to think it through. That was still true. But standing in that empty stone room with the morning light coming through the gap above the boarded windows, she understood for the first time since she had climbed out of that wagon and seen the valley below her that she was not trapped here. She was standing in an opportunity, and the difference between those two things was everything. She went back to the main house and sat at the kitchen table and opened her notebook for 2 hours without stopping. Martha came in twice and left coffee without speaking. The second time, she left a plate of bread and cold meat beside the cup, which Elizabeth ate without looking up from the page. When Caleb came in for the midday meal, he glanced at the notebook and said nothing. When he sat down and Martha set food in front of him, he looked across the table at Elizabeth, who had finally stopped writing and was staring at the wall with the expression of a person sorting through a very large and complicated problem. "Well," he said. She looked at him. "I think it could work," she said. "What could work?" "A stopping house," she said. "On the road. In your building. Meals for travelers. A clean place to sleep. Run by me." He looked at her steadily. "You would need repairs," he said. "The roof is the main thing. The windows, a proper door. The interior is sound. Supplies, furnishings, food stock. I have worked out a basic list," she said. And she pushed the notebook across the table toward him. He took it. He read through what she had written. His face did not change. But she had learned to watch other things. The way he moved through the pages. The fact that he went back to the second page and read it again. "You are asking me to fund this," he said. "No," she said. "I am asking you to loan me the materials for the repairs. I will keep a record of every cent. I will pay you back from whatever the stopping house earns. At whatever rate is fair." He looked up from the notebook. "That could take years," he said. "Or it could take less time than that," she said. "Either way, it is a loan, not a gift. Why does that matter to you?" She looked at him directly. "Because I need to know that I built it," she said. "Not that it was handed to me. Not that I am living inside someone else's generosity. I need to know that whatever is there at the end of it, I earned." The kitchen was very quiet. Martha had gone somewhere else in the house. The sounds of the ranch came in faintly from outside. Somewhere in the distance, cattle moved. Caleb put the notebook down on the table between them. He looked at her with that careful, watchful attention that she still could not entirely read. "The repairs would take about 2 weeks if I put 2 men on it," he said. Her heart did something sudden and unexpected. 3 weeks if the weather turns," he continued. "The roof is the slow part. You are right that the rest is sound." "How much would the materials cost?" she asked. Keeping her voice steady. "I will look at what we have on hand first," he said. "We may have more than you think." She nodded. "I will pay you back," she said again. "I know you will," he said. He said it simply. Not as a compliment. Just as a fact he had already assessed and settled on. He stood up. He picked up his plate, rinsed it, set it on the rack. He walked toward the door and pulled his hat from the hook. "I will talk to Earl and Thomas this afternoon," he said. "They can assess what the building needs and start pulling materials tomorrow." He opened the door. "Caleb," she said. He stopped. It was the first time she had used his name. She was not sure either of them had noticed that until this exact moment. He turned. She looked at him across the kitchen, at this tall, quiet man, with his worn coat and his complicated honesty and his 4,000 acres that he had hidden like an embarrassment. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face that she did not have a name for yet. "Do not thank me," he said. "Just make it work." He went out. Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on her notebook and breathed. Outside, she could already hear him speaking to Earl. She could hear Earl responding. She could hear the shift in the activity of the ranch, the sound of purpose redirecting toward something new. She picked up her pen. She had work to do. The repairs took 17 days. Elizabeth knew this because she counted every one of them, not out of impatience, but out of the particular attention of a woman who understood that time spent waiting was time that could be used planning. While Earl and Thomas worked on the roof, and Thomas sourced the window glass from Garrison, Elizabeth was not idle for a single morning. She mapped the stopping house in her notebook. Not the physical layout, she had that memorized already, but the operational layout. How many travelers could she realistically accommodate on any given night? What a reasonable meal would cost to produce at volume? What she would charge? How long before the loan repayment to Caleb could begin? She built the numbers carefully, checked them twice, then built them again, more conservatively, to account for the things she had not thought of yet. Because there were always things you had not thought of yet. She talked to Clara about which of the women in the worker cottages might want additional work. Clara had 4 names ready before Elizabeth finished asking the question, which told her that Clara had been thinking about this already, had perhaps been hoping for something like it, and that there was a whole layer of need on this ranch that the ledger numbers had never captured. She talked to the cook at the bunkhouse, a barrel-chested man named Gus, who had opinions about everything, and kept them all available at the surface, ready to deploy at any moment. Gus told her which suppliers were reliable and which ones delivered short on weight and counted on you not to check. He told her what travelers actually wanted after a long ride, which was not fancy food but hot food, enough of it, and something sweet at the end if you could manage it. He told her that the road in autumn brought more traffic than Earl had described because the logging camps started their big push before the freeze, and the crews came through in numbers. You could do real business, Gus said, with the blunt confidence of a man who had spent 20 years feeding people and knew what that meant. If you do it right. What does doing it right look like to you? She asked. He pointed at her notebook. Write this down clean. Hot, enough. Those 3 things and people will come back. Add one more thing. What? Remember their names, he said. A man who travels that road every month and gets called by his name when he walks in your door. He will never stop anywhere else. She wrote it down. On the 14th day, with the roof done and the windows in and the door rehung on proper hinges, Elizabeth walked through the building alone for the first time since construction had started. She did not rush it. She went room by room and stood in each one and checked it against what she had planned. It was not finished. There were furnishings to arrange, and the kitchen equipment to set up, and 100 small details that would take another week. But the bones of it were right. The walls held warmth. The fireplace drew cleanly. The light coming through the new windows made the stone interior feel solid rather than cold. She stood in the main room for a long time. She was 38 days into her marriage. She had arrived with $4.60 and a single travel bag. She had spent most of those 38 days learning a ranch she had not expected, managing an arrangement with a man she had not expected, and building toward something that, 6 weeks ago, she could not have imagined. She was not happy exactly. Happy was too simple a word for what she was. She was engaged. She was purposeful. She was more fully herself than she had been in years. Possibly than she had ever been, and that feeling was so unfamiliar that it took her several days to recognize it for what it was. She was still angry with Caleb sometimes. The anger came and went. Less sharp now than it had been in the first week, but still present on the mornings when she remembered how she had stood in that church and made a decision based on incomplete information. She had a right to that anger, and she did not pretend otherwise. But she was beginning to understand the difference between the thing she was angry about and the man she was angry with. The day the stopping house opened, it rained. Not the soft rain that made everything look washed and clean, but the heavy, Aggressive Montana rain that made roads into mud and turned wagons into misery and made every sensible traveler look for the nearest roof and refuse to leave it. She had not planned to open in rain. She'd planned a quiet first week. A few travelers at most, enough to work out the operational details before real volume came. The rain had other ideas. By mid-morning she had 6 travelers sheltering in the main room, 2 of them with horses that Earl had quietly offered to stable without being asked, which was the kind of initiative she had come to expect from him. By midday she had 8 travelers and had sent one of Clara's women back to the main house for more bread because she had not planned on feeding this many people at once. Gus appeared at the back door of the stopping house at noon with a pot of stew large enough to feed people and the expression of a man who had anticipated exactly this. "I figured," he said simply. She could have kissed him. She did not, but she thought about it. She fed 8 travelers hot stew and fresh bread and strong coffee and charged them a fair rate. Not cheap enough to suggest desperation and not expensive enough to cause resentment. And every one of them paid without argument. 2 of them asked if she took travelers by arrangement, meaning could they send word ahead when they expected to pass through. Yes, she said, though she had not yet worked out the exact mechanics of that system. "Good," said a lean man with a freight hauler's build and a freight hauler's economy of words. "Because I come through here every 3 weeks, and Hennessy's place being gone has been a genuine hardship." By the time the rain eased in late afternoon and the travelers began to sort themselves out, she had taken in more money in a single day than she had earned in a month at the boarding house in Black Ridge. She sat in the empty main room after they all left and counted the coins and bills on the table in front of her and tried to decide how she felt about it. She felt terrified. She felt exhilarated. She felt the specific combination of those 2 things that she had learned over the years meant she was doing something that actually mattered. Caleb appeared in the doorway just before supper. He looked at the room. At the tables she had arranged, at the swept floor and the banked fire, and the evidence of a day's worth of real operation. "How did it go?" he said. She told him the numbers. He was quiet for a moment on the first day. "It rained," she said. "They needed somewhere to stop." "Still," he said. "Still," she agreed. He looked around the room again with that careful attention he gave to everything. "Gus told me he brought stew," he said. "I will compensate from the day's earnings," she said immediately. "I am not asking for compensation," he said. "I am saying Gus does not do things without thinking them through. He decided you needed help and he helped. That means something." She looked at him. "You sent him, I did not send him," Caleb said. "But I may have mentioned this morning that today was your opening and that the rain was going to complicate things." She studied his face. "That is almost the same as sending him. Gus makes his own decisions," Caleb said. She let it go, but she filed it. They walked back to the main house together in the last light. Not side by side, exactly, more like 2 people moving in the same direction who had not yet decided whether to close the gap between them. The air after the rain was clean and cold and smelled like the pine that surrounded the valley. "I need to work out a system for advance arrangements," she said. "Travelers who want to send word ahead. The mail wagon comes through twice a week," Caleb said. "Earl manages the pickup. He could flag anything addressed to the stopping house. I will set up a name," she said. "Something simple. The Thornton Stopping House," he said. She glanced at him. "My name or yours?" He looked back at her. "Ours," he said. She did not respond immediately. She walked for a few steps, thinking about that word. Ours, the quiet way he had said it. Not possessive. Not claiming. Just stating what was already true in the practical sense. The way he stated most things. "All right," she said. That night she wrote in her notebook until the candle burned low. And she was still writing when she heard Caleb's boots on the stairs, and his door closed down the hall. And she sat for a while after that in the near dark, and thought about the word ours, and what it meant when a man who guarded everything he had used it, about something she had built. The following 3 weeks moved fast. The stopping house developed its rhythm. Elizabeth opened 5 days a week, closed Sundays for restocking and maintenance, and kept Saturdays light because Saturday traffic on the road was unpredictable. She brought in 2 of Clara's women on the busiest days, paying them from the house earnings, and she kept Gus's stew recipe as the backbone of the menu and built everything else around it. The ledger she kept for the stopping house was different from Caleb's ranch ledger. Smaller, more personal. Every transaction in her own hand. Every cost noted, every adjustment made in the margin when something did not work the way she had planned. She was learning in real time, and she kept every lesson in those pages so she would not have to learn it twice. The freight hauler, whose name was Roy Saunders, came through on his 3-week cycle and called out her name when he walked in the door. And she called out his, and he looked at her with an expression of such uncomplicated satisfaction that she understood exactly what Gus had been telling her. Remember their names. That was everything. It was in the middle of the 4th week that the first real problem arrived. His name was Gerald Marsh, and he came to the stopping house on a Tuesday morning when Elizabeth was alone. Clara's women not yet arrived, the fire built up, and the first preparations underway for the day's meals. He was well dressed, in the way of men who wanted you to know they were well dressed, the kind of clothing that announced money before the man inside it had to say a word. He looked around the stopping house with the particular expression of a person conducting a valuation. "Mrs. Thornton," he said. "Yes," she said. "Gerald Marsh," he said. "I represent Marsh and Collierland Associates out of Helena." She kept her hands busy with what she was doing. "What can I do for you, Mr. Marsh?" "I wanted to introduce myself," he said, taking a seat at one of the tables without being invited to. "We have significant interests in this part of Montana. Land acquisition, primarily. Development of commercial corridors along the major supply routes." She turned to look at him. "Is that so? The road that runs past this property is going to become considerably more important in the next 5 to 10 years, he said. "The territory is growing. The supply chains are extending. Properties along key routes will be worth substantially more than their current value." "I see," she said. "We have been in conversation with a number of landowners in this valley," he said. "Including, I believe, your husband." She said nothing. "I wondered whether you might be in a position to speak with Mr. Thornton on our behalf," Marsh said. "We believe there is a mutually beneficial arrangement to be discussed. Regarding this portion of the Thornton property specifically." She set down what she was holding. She turned fully to face him. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "are you suggesting that I advocate to my husband to sell a piece of his property to your company?" Marsh spread his hands in a gesture meant to suggest that he was a reasonable man discussing reasonable things. "Not sell necessarily, lease perhaps, or a partnership arrangement. The stopping house operation here is exactly the kind of commercial activity we support. Under the right arrangement, it could be significantly expanded. Additional funding, a formal structure, real growth potential." She looked at him carefully. He was smooth, the kind of smooth that came from practice. "And what would Marsh and Collier receive from this arrangement?" she said. "A stake in the operation," he said, "and certain land use rights along the road corridor." "What kind of land use rights?" He smiled. "Details to be worked out in negotiation." "Naturally," she said. She picked up the coffee pot and poured him a cup, because she had learned that people talked more freely when they were being given something. "Have you spoken with Mr. Thornton directly?" she said. "We have had preliminary correspondence," Marsh said. And Marsh picked up his cup. "Mr. Thornton has been somewhat resistant to opening a dialogue. We were hoping a more informal approach might be productive." There it was. He had not come to the stopping house to talk about a business arrangement. He had come because Caleb had already told him no. And he was trying to find a way around that no through the wife. Elizabeth kept her face completely neutral. "I appreciate you stopping in," she said. This is the kind of conversation my husband would need to be part of directly. I do not make decisions about the ranch property, but you might encourage him to. I do not make decisions about the ranch property, she said again. More quietly this time, which was more effective than saying it louder. Marsh read her correctly. He finished his coffee. He paid for it without being asked. He stood and adjusted his coat. I hope Mr. Thornton will reconsider, he said. We will be in the area for some time. I will pass that along, she said. He left. She stood in the stopping house for a moment after his wagon pulled away. She went over everything he had said, the way he had said it. The things he had not said, but had implied. The ease with which he had assumed she would be a useful channel around her husband. And the specific flavor of that assumption, the way it carried the belief that a wife would naturally be susceptible to flattery about her own business and would use whatever influence she had to push things in the direction she was being pushed. She picked up her notebook and wrote down everything she remembered about the conversation. Every detail, every phrase he had used about land use rights and corridor access, and the road becoming considerably more important. She had the growing feeling that this was not a simple business solicitation. That evening she told Caleb everything. He listened without expression. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He came to you, he said. Not a question. He came to the stopping house, she said. He knows I run it. He figured it was a softer target than you, and he was wrong. Very, she said. Caleb was quiet again. Longer this time. Marsh has been trying to get a foothold in this valley for 2 years, he said. He started with the Hendersons on the south side. Bought a small piece from them. The piece turned out to border the road right where the county is planning a new freight depot. The Hendersons did not know about the depot when they sold. Marsh did. Elizabeth felt the pieces shifting. He uses land use rights to position himself near infrastructure improvements, she said. Yes, and the road past your property. There is talk of a rail spur, Caleb said. Nothing confirmed. But if the spur comes through, the land along the supply route becomes worth 10 times what it is now. Any corridor rights Marsh holds would make him the gatekeeper. She thought about what Marsh had said. Details to be worked out in negotiation, naturally. He was going to let me think I was negotiating a business expansion, she said, while he was actually acquiring access rights to position himself for the rail spur. Yes, Caleb said. You knew about this before he came today. I knew about the corridor strategy, he said. I did not know he would come to you directly. Does it surprise you? He looked at her. Less than it probably should. She sat back. She thought about the ledger she had been building for the stopping house. The income she had documented. The loan repayment she had begun structuring. The women from the cottages who now had reliable extra earnings. Roy Saunders coming through on his 3-week cycle. The whole careful construction of something that was beginning to work. He is not going to stop, she said. No, Caleb said. He is not. What are you going to do? He looked at her with the steady look she had learned to associate with decisions already made. Situations already assessed. The look of a man who had been managing threats to what he had built for long enough to have developed a particular clarity about it. I am going to talk to the county land office, he said. There are filings I should have made years ago that would complicate his strategy considerably. How soon? I will ride to Garrison Thursday, he said. I want to come, she said. He looked at her. Why? Because whatever Marsh is planning involves the stopping house as much as the ranch, she said. And the stopping house is mine. I want to understand exactly what we are protecting and why. He held her gaze for a moment. Thursday, he said. We leave at first light, she nodded. She sat at the table after he went upstairs and thought about that word again. We, not quite the same as ours, but moving in the same direction. She was not naive enough to think that one trip to the county land office would end whatever Gerald Marsh was building toward. Men like Marsh did not give up when the first approach failed. They regrouped. They found new angles. They were patient in the particular way of people who understood that money creates time, that resources create options, that the person with the most alternatives wins. But Elizabeth had been surviving on no alternatives for most of her adult life, and she had learned something in that process that men like Marsh typically had not. The most dangerous opponent is not the one with the most money. It is the one with nothing left to lose who has suddenly found something worth fighting for. She closed her notebook. She blew out the lamp, and in the dark of the kitchen, she felt something settle in her chest, not peace exactly, but the particular steadiness of a woman who has identified the problem clearly and is already working on the solution. Thursday was 4 days away. She had a great deal to do before then. They rode to Garrison before dawn. Elizabeth sat beside Caleb on the wagon seat with her notebook in her lap and the cold morning air cutting through her coat. And neither of them spoke much for the first hour. Not because there was nothing to say, but because they had both learned by now that silence between them was not empty. It was working space, the place where they each turned things over before bringing them out. She had spent the 4 days since Marsh's visit doing exactly what she told Caleb she would do. She had gone back through every conversation she could remember with the man, every phrase, every carefully placed word, and she had cross-referenced it against what Caleb had told her about the rail spur and the Henderson land and the corridor strategy. She had also talked to Roy Saunders on his latest run-through, because Roy had been traveling this road for 11 years and knew its history better than most. What Roy told her changed the shape of things considerably. "Marsh is not the first one to try it," Roy said, warming his hands on a cup of coffee at one of her tables. "There was a company out of Billings 3 years back. Different name, same idea. They got about a third of the way down the valley before the county land office caught wind and started asking questions. The company dissolved itself before anyone could make it formal." "The same principles?" Elizabeth asked. Roy looked at her with a freighter's measured respect. "That is a good question. I do not know the answer. But it is a very good question." She had written it in her notebook and underlined it. Now, in the wagon moving through the early cold toward Garrison, she told Caleb what Roy had said. He listened without looking at her, keeping his eyes on the road and the horse. "I have heard something similar," he said. "About the Billings Company. I did not know about the dissolution. If the same principles are behind Marsh and Collier," she said, "then there is a pattern, and patterns can be documented. What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that when we get to the county land office, we should ask not just about protective filings for the Thornton property, but about the ownership history of whatever Marsh has already acquired in the valley. Who sold to him when? What they were told about the terms." Caleb was quiet. "The Hendersons," she said. "You said they did not know about the depot when they sold." "I said that." "Yes. Have they been told since?" Another pause. "I do not know." "Then that is something else we need to find out," she said. "Because if Marsh acquired their land through material misrepresentation, that is not just a competitive problem, that is a legal one." The wagon moved through the early light, and Caleb did not speak for a long moment. And Elizabeth had learned by now that his long silences were not discomfort. They were the sound of a man thinking carefully. "You have been busy," he said finally. "I told you I was going to think it through before I said it out loud," she said. "You did say that. Now I am saying it out loud." He glanced at her then. Just briefly. But she caught it, and what she saw in his face was not surprise exactly. It was something closer to recognition, the look of a person seeing something they had suspected for a while being confirmed in full. "All right," he said. "We do all of it. The protective filings and the ownership history and the Hendersons." She opened her notebook to the page she had prepared. "I wrote down the questions in order," she said. "Start with what protects us. Then build outward." He looked at the road. "You thought this through like a campaign. I thought it through like a woman who has been outmaneuvered by people with more money before and does not intend to let it happen again," she said. He said nothing to that, but the corner of his jaw eased, just slightly, in the way she had learned to read. The county land office in Garrison was a small room with large consequences. The clerk was a meticulous man named Aldous Fitch, who wore spectacles and kept his files in a system so precise that he could put his hand on any document within 30 seconds. He was also, as Elizabeth discovered, within the first 5 minutes of conversation, deeply unhappy about Gerald Marsh, not personally. Fitch was too careful a man to let personal feelings drive him, but professionally, in the way of someone who has watched the same irregularity appear in his paperwork twice, and suspects he is going to see it a third time. The Henderson transaction, Fitch said, pulling the file with exactly the speed Elizabeth had assessed him capable of. I can tell you what was filed. I cannot tell you what was said in private negotiations. What was filed, Caleb said. Fitch opened the folder. Standard purchase agreement. Fair market value at the time of sale, which was assessed without reference to the planned depot location. The depot planning documents were not filed with this office until 8 weeks after the Henderson sale closed. 8 weeks, Elizabeth said. 8 weeks, Fitch confirmed. And who initiated the depot planning? She said. Fitch looked at her over his spectacles. The freight company working with the county commissioner's office. And who holds the freight contract? Fitch was quiet for a moment. He looked at the file, he looked at the wall. He looked at Elizabeth with the expression of a man who has just been asked to say something. He has been thinking for months and has been waiting for someone with standing to ask it directly. The freight contract was awarded 18 months ago, he said carefully, to a company called Western Corridor Associates. Elizabeth wrote it down. Is Western Corridor Associates connected to Marsh and Collier Land Associates? She said. Fitch closed the Henderson file and opened a different drawer. He took out a second folder. He set it on the desk between them without saying anything. Caleb leaned forward and read the top document. His expression did not change, but something in him went very still. The stillness Elizabeth associated with a man absorbing something significant. They share a registered agent, he said. They do, Fitch said. I am not in a position to characterize what that means legally. But I will tell you that I have sent a query to the Territorial Land Commissioner's office regarding certain filing irregularities in this district. 2 weeks ago. What kind of irregularities? Elizabeth said. The kind that occur when land acquisition precedes infrastructure announcements in a pattern that suggests advance on knowledge, Fitch said, each word placed with the precision of a man who had been composing this sentence in his head for some time. Consistently, across multiple transactions in multiple counties. The room was very quiet. Elizabeth looked at Caleb. He was looking at the folder. Mr. Fitch, she said. What would the Thornton Ranch need to file today to most effectively protect its road corridor access, regardless of what happens with the rail spur or any related infrastructure decisions? Fitch almost smiled. It was the expression of a man who had been hoping someone would ask exactly that question. Sit down, Mrs. Thornton, he said. This will take a while. But it is worth the time. They were in the land office for 3 hours. When they walked out, the Thornton Ranch Road Corridor had 4 new filings attached to it. Protective easements, right-of-way documentation, a commercial operation registration for the stopping house that tied it formally to the Thornton property in a way that would make any attempt to separate the two legally complicated and time-consuming. Fitch had walked them through each document with the thoroughness of a man who understood that paperwork done right now prevented disasters done wrong later. On the way back to the wagon, Caleb bought 2 meat pies from the bakery near the post office and handed her one without asking whether she wanted it. She was hungry enough that she ate half of it before they reached the wagon. He waited until she had climbed up before climbing up himself, and they sat for a moment in the pale afternoon light before he picked up the reins. Well, he said. Well, she said. He looked at the half-eaten meat pie in her hand. Fitch was thorough. He has been waiting for someone to let him be thorough, she said. He knew something was wrong, and he had nowhere to put it. He has somewhere to put it now, Caleb said. Yes, and so do the Hendersons. He looked at her. You want to tell them? Someone should, she said. They have a right to know what their land was worth when they sold it and what it is worth now. What they do with that information is their decision. But they deserve to have it. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Old Pete Henderson is a proud man. This is going to be a hard thing to hear. I know, she said. Hard things are still worth saying. He picked up the reins. We will go Sunday, he said. The Hendersons are south of the valley. Half a day's ride. She nodded. They rode back toward the ranch in the lengthening afternoon. And Elizabeth ate the rest of her meat pie and thought about Gerald Marsh and what he would do when he realized the approach he had tried with her had not only failed, but had accelerated exactly not to protective action he had been hoping to prevent. She thought about Fitch's query to the territorial commissioner. 2 weeks ago, whatever that process was going to produce, it was already in motion before Marsh had ever walked into her stopping house. He had moved faster than she had realized, and so, without knowing it, had she. The ranch came into view as the sun dropped behind the western ridge, the valley filling with that particular late light gold that Elizabeth had noticed on her very first day and had been noticing every evening since. The worker cottages with their lanterns coming on. The barns settled and familiar, the stone house at the top of the rise holding the last of the light in its west-facing windows. She was looking at it differently than she had on that first day. Not with the shock of the unexpected anymore. Not with the complicated anger of a woman who had been handed something she had not agreed to. She was looking at it with the particular attention of someone who had spent 60-something days learning what it actually was. What it needed, what it could be, what she could bring to it that it did not already have. She caught herself thinking this and then sat with it for a moment, letting it settle. They were almost at the main gate when Caleb said, without preamble, Clara told me the stopping house income covered your first loan repayment installment. She had left the repayment calculation on the kitchen table that morning, clearly labeled, because she had told him she would keep records, and she had. It did, she said. You did not have to start repayment this quickly, he said. I told you I would. I know what you told me. I am saying you could have taken more time. I did not need more time, she said. He was quiet for a moment. You are the most stubborn person I have ever met. She looked at him. Is that a complaint? He kept his eyes on the road. No, he said. She turned back to the valley. Then we agree. The gate opened ahead of them, and Earl was there, holding a lantern, and there was something in his expression that told her immediately that something had happened while they were in garrison. What is it? Caleb said, reading the same thing she had. A rider came about 2 hours ago, Earl said, from Marsh. Left a letter. He held it out. Caleb took it. He opened it and read it standing at the gate with the lantern, throwing unsteady light across the page. Elizabeth watched his face. The stillness that came over it was different from the usual stillness. This was the stillness of a man holding something he had not expected. He handed her the letter without speaking. She read it. It was not what she had expected either. Marsh was not threatening. He was not pressuring. The letter was almost polite, which was somehow worse than a threat would have been. He wrote that he was aware of the filings made at the Garrison Land Office that day, which meant he had someone inside the office or someone watching it, and the speed of that information was itself alarming. He wrote that he hoped the Thorntons would reconsider his proposal in light of the significant developments he anticipated in the valley over the coming months. He wrote that there were ways to structure an arrangement that would benefit all parties. And then, at the bottom, almost as a postscript, he wrote that he had enjoyed speaking with Mrs. Thornton at the stopping house, and that he found her business instincts admirable, and that he believed a woman of her capabilities deserved a more significant stage for them. Elizabeth read that last paragraph twice. She folded the letter carefully. She handed it back to Caleb. He is trying to split us, she said. Yes, Caleb said. He thinks flattering me separately will create a wedge. Yes. He does not understand how we work, she said. Caleb looked at her. In the lantern light, she could see something in his face that she had not seen before. Something that went beyond the careful assessment he usually gave her. Something that was closer to what she might call, in a different conversation, gratitude. Except it was not quite gratitude either. It was simpler than that, and more important, he trusted her. He had trusted her going into that land office today. He had trusted her with Roy's information, and the questions she had developed, and the order she had laid them out in. He had trusted her to handle Marsh when Marsh came to her directly. He had trusted her with the ledger, and the stopping house, and the loan, and the repayment, and 100 small decisions that he had simply let her make without second-guessing them. She had been so focused on building her own independence, on proving to herself that she could stand without his money holding her up, that she had not fully registered what he had been doing on his side. He had been standing beside her, not in front, not behind, beside. "What do you want to do about the letter?" she said. "Nothing," Caleb said. "Not tonight? Tomorrow? Tomorrow I want to talk to the Hendersons before we do anything else. Whatever Marsh is planning next, having the Hendersons informed and on the right side of this is more important than responding to his letter." She nodded. Sunday, he said. Earl had been standing discreetly at the edge of this exchange, and now he quietly took the horse's bridle and led the wagon toward the stable without being asked. Elizabeth climbed down and stood in the evening chill and thought about what it meant that Marsh had known about the Garrison filings within hours. Someone was telling him things. Someone with access to information about the Thornton property, about their movements, about the stopping house. She thought about that all the way into the house and through supper and into the evening, turning it over, testing it against what she knew, eliminating possibilities. She was still thinking about it when Martha came into the kitchen after supper to clear the dishes and said, in the particular tone of a woman mentioning something that had been sitting heavy, "A man came to the stopping house last week, Tuesday. I saw his wagon from the kitchen window. Stayed about half an hour." Elizabeth looked up. "You saw the wagon. I know most of the wagons that come through," Martha said. "That one I did not recognize. It came from the East Road. Not from Garrison. What did it look like?" Martha described it. Not Marsh's wagon. Someone else. Someone who had come while Elizabeth was alone, before Clara's women arrived, and had sat in the main room long enough to look around carefully and ask what questions he might have asked. She thought about the conversation with Marsh, the things he had seemed to already know about the stopping house operation, the detail that had struck her as slightly too specific for a first meeting, but that she had attributed to general intelligence gathering. He had sent someone first, a scout, someone to assess the stopping house. Talk to her, report back. She picked up her notebook. She wrote down everything Martha had said. The day, the time, the description of the wagon. Then she wrote, he had information about the stopping house before he came himself. Someone gave it to him, or someone gathered it for him. This means his approach to me was not improvised. It was planned. A planned approach. A flattering letter separating her from Caleb. A shared registered agent between his land company and the freight contractor. A pattern of acquisitions preceding infrastructure announcements. This was not a man making opportunistic land deals. This was a man running a systematic operation. She put down her pen. She thought about something Gus had said to her in the first week, not about the stopping house, but about the ranch in general, when she had asked him how Caleb managed to hold everything together. He pays attention to things other people think are too small to matter, Gus had said. That is how he built this place. One small thing at a time. She was beginning to understand that the same approach that built something could protect it. She went to find Caleb. He was in the room he used as a study, going through papers by lamplight. He looked up when she came in. She told him about the scout, about Martha's description. about what it meant for the timeline of Marcia's planning. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down his pen. "He has been planning this for longer than I thought," he said. "Yes," she said, "which means we need to move faster than we planned with the Hendersons. Sunday may be too slow." He looked at her. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she agreed. She turned to leave. "Elizabeth," he said. She stopped. She turned back. He was looking at her with that expression she had no name for yet. The one that had been appearing more frequently over the past weeks. The one that existed somewhere between the careful assessment he gave everything and something altogether more personal. "You knew something was wrong about that first visit before you had the evidence for it," he said. "You felt it and you went looking." "Yes," she said. "That is not bookkeeping," he said. "That is something else." She held his gaze. "It is paying attention," she said. "It is what you do too." He was quiet. "It is why we are going to win this," she said. "Because he thinks he is dealing with a rancher and his wife. He is not paying attention to what we actually are." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "What are we?" he said. It was a genuine question. Not a test. Not a challenge. A man asking something real in the particular way of someone who has been alone long enough that the answer matters more than he expected. She thought about 60-something days, the ledger and the loan and the stopping house and the rain on opening day and Roy Saunders calling out her name and the land office in Garrison and the meat pie eaten in a wagon on the way home. She thought about the word ours. She thought about the word we. "We are harder to beat than he thinks," she said. Caleb held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he nodded, just once, and looked back at his papers. She went back to the kitchen and sat at the table and opened her notebook and began preparing for tomorrow. Outside, the ranch was quiet. The lanterns in the worker cottages burned steadily. The cattle were settled. The stopping house stood dark at the northeast corner of the property, locked and waiting for morning, already real in a way she could not have imagined 60-something days ago, when she had $4.60 and a single bag and a name she had not yet become. She was Mrs. Thornton. She was the woman who ran the stopping house on the Garrison Road. She was the woman who had looked at Caleb's ledger and seen what he could not see from inside it. And she was beginning to understand, in the particular slow way that true things settle in, that she was also something she had not been in a very long time. She was not alone. They rode to the Henderson place at first light. Elizabeth had barely slept, not from worry exactly, but from the particular restlessness of a mind that had identified a problem clearly and was impatient to move on it. She had spent the dark hours before dawn going back through her notebook, reading everything she had written since Marcia's first visit, looking for anything she had missed, any details she had noted at the time and not yet fully understood. She found two. The first was the timing of Marcia's letter arriving the same evening as the Garrison filings. Fitch had processed those documents in the late afternoon. The writer would have had to leave Garrison almost immediately after the filing was complete to reach the Thornton ranch by evening, which meant Marsh had not waited to read the documents. He had been told they were happening while they were happening. The second was something Roy Saunders had said on his last run-through, which she had written down and underlined, but not yet connected to anything. Roy had mentioned in passing that the new freight scheduling out of Garrison had changed twice in the past 3 months, rerouting certain loads through a different waypoint than the one that had been standard for years. The waypoint it was rerouting through happened to be on land that acquired from the Hendersons. She was still working through the implications of this when Caleb came downstairs before dawn, found her at the kitchen table with her notebook and a cold cup of coffee, and did not say anything about either the hour or the coffee. He simply made a fresh pot and set a cup in front of her and pulled on his coat. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. She told him about the 2 things she had found on the ride south. He listened with the focused attention she had come to depend on, the quality of listening that made her feel every word she said was being fully received. Not just heard, but retained and considered. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, watching the road ahead. The freight rerouting, he said. If Marsh controls the waypoint, and he controls the freight scheduling relationship through Western Corridor Associates, she said, then he does not just own land. He owns the movement of goods through this part of the territory. The rail spur, when it comes, does not need to run through his property. It just needs to connect to the freight network he has already positioned himself inside. Caleb's jaw tightened. He is building a choke point. Step by step, she said. Each piece looks like an ordinary transaction. The Henderson land, the freight contract, the corridor access he was trying to get from us. Put them together and it is something else entirely. And once the rail spur confirms, Caleb said, everything moves 10 times faster, and anyone who has not protected their position by then is dealing with it under pressure. Yes, she said. He drove for a moment in silence. You put all of this together last night, he said. I put it together from things I had already written down, she said. I just had not looked at them in the right order until now. He glanced at her. That is still putting it together. She did not argue the point. The Henderson place was smaller than the Thornton ranch by a significant margin, but had been well kept in the way of people who took pride in what they had. Old Pete Henderson met them at the gate with the guarded expression of a man who had learned to be careful about unexpected visitors. He was in his 60s, lean and weathered, with the particular dignity of a man who had built something from nothing and knew it. His wife Margaret appeared behind him and assessed the situation with the quick eyes of a woman who had been managing her husband's pride alongside their household for 40 years. Caleb Thornton, Pete Henderson said, with neither warmth nor hostility. Just acknowledgement, Caleb said. This is my wife. Elizabeth. Pete looked at her. Margaret looked at her. Elizabeth met both gazes steadily. Come in, Margaret said. Before Pete could say anything else, they sat at the Henderson kitchen table, which was smaller than the Thornton one, but had the same quality of being a place where real things got said. And Elizabeth let Caleb begin because she understood that the relationship between Pete Henderson and Caleb Thornton had a history she did not know, and that history mattered here. Caleb told Pete about Marsh, about Western Corridor Associates and the shared registered agent, about the freight rerouting, about the rail spur, and what the Henderson land was likely worth now compared to what Pete had sold it for. Pete Henderson sat very still through all of it. Margaret did not sit still. She got up once to pour coffee she did not offer anyone. She stood at the kitchen counter and listened with her back partly turned, which was not rudeness, but the posture of a woman processing something difficult and needing to not be watched while she did it. When Caleb finished, Pete was quiet for a long time. How much more is it worth? He said finally. I do not know exactly, Caleb said. But the difference between what he paid you and what that land is worth with corridor rights attached to a rail connection is substantial. Pete's hands were flat on the table. He knew about the rail spur when he bought from us. We believe so, Caleb said. Fitch at the land office believes so. And the depot, Pete said. The freight depot they put on the East Road. Yes. Pete looked at his hands. He was a proud man. Elizabeth could see it in every line of him, in the way his shoulders had set when Caleb began talking, in the way he had not once looked at Margaret during the telling. A proud man being told he had been outmaneuvered by someone he had trusted enough to shake hands with. Margaret turned from the counter. What can be done about it? She said, directing the question at Elizabeth, which surprised everyone, including Elizabeth. She met Margaret's eyes. Fitch has already queried the territorial commissioner, she said. If Marsh used material misrepresentation to acquire the Henderson land, that is a legal matter that goes beyond the land office. But it requires the Hendersons to be willing to say formally what they were told and what they were not told at the time of the sale. Margaret looked at Pete. Pete looked at the table. I signed the papers, he said. You signed papers based on information you were given, Elizabeth said. The information you were not given is what matters. I should have asked more questions, Pete said. And his voice was rough with the particular self-judgment of a man who was already doing it to himself before anyone else could. Marsh made his living making sure people did not know the right questions to ask, Elizabeth said. That is not your failure. That is his strategy. Pete looked up at her. She held his gaze. He did the same thing to us, she said. He came to the stopping house with a business proposition that sounded reasonable and buried the real objective undecided. He relies on people being reasonable and trusting and not knowing what they do not know. That is not a character flaw in his victims. It is a weapon he uses deliberately. The kitchen was quiet. Margaret sat back down. She sat close to Pete and did not touch him, but was near enough that the nearness itself was its own kind of statement. Pete Henderson breathed out slowly. What do you need from us? He said. Elizabeth opened her notebook. They were at the Henderson table for 2 hours. She took careful notes of everything Pete and Margaret could remember about the Marsh negotiation. Every conversation, every representation that had been made, every document they had been shown. Margaret remembered more than Pete, which did not surprise Elizabeth. Margaret had the kind of memory that women developed when they understood that the details other people dismissed would matter later. By the time they left, Pete Henderson had agreed to write a formal statement for Aldous Fitch at the county land office. Margaret had already started drafting it in her own hand before the Thornton wagon cleared the gate. On the ride back north, Elizabeth and Caleb did not speak much at first. She was writing in her notebook, capturing everything from the Henderson conversation while it was still fresh. He was driving and thinking in the way she had come to recognize, the long quiet that was not absence but processing. Margaret directed her question at you, he said after a while. I noticed, Elizabeth said. Not at me, he said. She looked at you. She wanted to know what could be done practically, Elizabeth said. She assessed that I was more likely to have a practical answer than a general one. She was right, he said. Elizabeth kept writing. You handled Pete carefully, Caleb said. The part about it not being his failure. He needed to hear that before he could move. It is also true, she said. Yes, he said. But you knew when to say it. She looked up from her notebook. He was watching the road. She thought about what she was going to say next and decided to say it plainly because plainly was the only way things between them had actually worked. I know what I am doing in a room with people, she said. I have been doing it for 12 years in other people's houses. Reading what they need. Knowing when to speak and when to wait. I was good at it when I was doing it for people who did not know my name. I am better at it now. He glanced at her. Because now I am doing it for something I chose, she said. He held her gaze for a moment before looking back at the road. Yes, he said. That one word carried something she did not press on. She let it sit between them, the way you let something fragile sit. Carefully, with attention, but without handling it too much. They were 2 Mile Ranch when they saw the second rider. He came from the east, moving fast, and he pulled up when he saw the Thornton wagon coming toward him. Elizabeth recognized Earl a moment before he pulled his horse alongside them. Earl's face told her something had happened before he said a word. Mr. Thornton, he said. Marsh came to the stopping house this morning. Elizabeth felt everything in her go sharp and still. When, Caleb said. About an hour after you left. He had 2 men with him. They did not go inside. They stood at the road and looked at the building. Did anyone speak with them? Elizabeth said. Clara's woman, the one who opens up on Saturdays, she was already there. She said Marsh spoke to her at the door. Asked questions about the operation. How many days a week it ran. Who managed it? Whether the owner was often present. What did she tell him? Elizabeth said. She told him it was a private operation, and he was welcome to come in for a meal, but she was not able to discuss business matters with visitors, Earl said. Elizabeth's chest tightened with something that was equal parts relief and fierce pride for a woman she had hired 2 months ago who had never been asked to do anything like that before. and had done it perfectly. "Her name is Hannah," Elizabeth said to Caleb. "I know," he said. "She needs to know that she did exactly right." "I will tell her," Earl said. But Mr. Thornton Marsh left a message. He said he would be at the Garrison Hotel through the end of the week, and he hoped to have a meeting with you and Mrs. Thornton before he moved on. Caleb looked at the road ahead. "Tell Roy Saunders when he comes through that I need a message carried to Fitch in Garrison," he said. "Tell him that Tinterners have a statement ready and that we have additional documentation regarding the freight rerouting and the Western Corridor connection. Tell him we are prepared to meet with the Territorial Commissioner's representative whenever they are ready." Earl nodded and was already turning his horse. "Earl," Elizabeth said. He stopped. "Tell Hannah I said thank you. By name. Make sure she hears it that way." Earl nodded again and rode. They drove the last 2 miles in the particular charged silence of people moving towards something that is already in motion and cannot be stopped, only managed. Elizabeth finished her notes. She closed the notebook. She looked at the road and thought about Gerald Marsh standing outside her stopping house with 2 men, looking at what she had built, assessing it the way he assessed everything, as leverage or obstacle or opportunity. She thought about what he saw. A small operation on a country road, a stone building, a woman's enterprise attached to a wealthy husband's property. She thought about what he did not see. The Henderson statement going to Fitch. The additional documentation on Western Corridor. The protective filings already recorded and untouchable. Roy Saunders carrying messages with the efficiency of a man who had been moving things across this territory for 11 years. Hannah standing at the stopping house door and protecting the operation with calm intelligence she had developed in a cottage on this ranch where nobody had previously thought to ask what she was capable of. Marsh had looked at Thornton Ranch and seen a wealthy man with land and a new wife and an opportunity. He had not looked carefully enough at any of the 3. The meeting happened 4 days later. Not at the Garrison Hotel. At the stopping house. Elizabeth had suggested it, and Caleb had agreed without asking why. Because he understood by now that she did not do things without reasons, and that her reasons were worth waiting to hear. Her reason was simple. She wanted Marsh in her space. On ground she controlled, surrounded by the evidence of what she had built. She wanted him to have to see it clearly before any conversation began. Marsh arrived with 1 associate this time. No second man watching from the road. He came in through the stopping house door like a paying traveler, because that was how she had written the invitation. "Come as a guest. Sit at a table, have coffee. Then we can talk." He was smooth as ever. He sat down. He accepted the coffee. Hannah brought with the practiced ease of a man who was always comfortable regardless of where he sat. He made a brief comment about the quality of the space. The solid construction, the sensible layout. Elizabeth let him finish. Then she set her notebook on the table, open to the pages she wanted. And she said, "Mr. Marsh, we know about Western Corridor Associates." He did not flinch. She had not expected him to. "We know about the freight rerouting," she continued. "We know about the shared registered agent. We know about the sequence of acquisitions relative to the infrastructure announcements. And we know about the pattern of the same approach in other counties under a predecessor company." Marsh looked at her with the careful attention of a man reassessing a situation. "We have shared all of this with Aldous Fitch at the county land office," she said, "who has already sent a formal query to the Territorial Commissioner's office. The Henderson family has provided a written statement regarding the representations made to them at the time of their land sale. That statement is now part of the official record." Marsh set down his coffee cup. He looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Marsh looked back at Elizabeth. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, "I believe there has been some misunderstanding about the nature of my business activities." "There has not," she said. "I want to be direct with you, so there is no confusion going forward. The Thornton Ranch Road Corridor is protected by 4 new filings. The stopping house operation is formally registered and tied to the property in a way that cannot be separated without a legal process that would take years, and that the Territorial Commissioner's office would be closely interested in. Any future approach to the Thornton property through either of us, directly or through intermediaries, will be documented and added to the file that Fitch is building. Marsh was quiet. He looked at her with an expression she could not entirely read. Not defeat, not yet, but the particular recalibration of a man who had walked into a room expecting one kind of conversation and found a completely different one waiting for him. "You have been thorough," he said. "Yes," she said. "The Henderson statement is a complication," he said. "It is more than a complication," she said. "And you know it." He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked up at her with the first expression she had seen from him that was genuinely unguarded. "You were not what I expected," he said. "I know," she said. "That was my advantage." He stood. He adjusted his coat. He picked up his hat. He looked at Caleb once more, with the look of a man reassessing a long-held assumption. "Mr. Thornton," he said. "Mr. Marsh," Caleb said. Marsh walked out of the stopping house without another word. Through the window, Elizabeth watched his wagon move away down the road towards Garrison. She watched it until it was gone. Then she turned and looked at the room she had built. The tables and the fireplace and the clean floor, and Hannah refilling the coffee pot in the back without being asked. Caleb was looking at her. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Caleb said, "He called you thorough." "He meant it as an observation," she said. I took it as a compliment. Something in Caleb's face opened. Not slowly, the way things between them had usually moved. All at once, the way a door opens when the latch finally gives. He smiled. Not the almost smile she had been catching glimpses of for months. A real one. The kind that started in the eyes and moved outward and changed the whole shape of his face into something she had not seen before and would not be able to forget. She felt something shift in her own chest in response. She was not ready to name it yet, but she was not afraid of it either. The Territorial Commissioner's response came 6 weeks later. It came in the form of an investigator from Helena who arrived at the Garrison Land Office with a letter of authority and a thorough set of questions for Aldous Fitch. Fitch had the files ready. The Henderson statement was in the record. The Western Corridor documentation was in the record. Elizabeth's written account of the Marsh visit to the stopping house. Every detail, every phrase, presented in the neat, precise handwriting of a woman who had been keeping careful records her entire professional life, was in the record. The investigation into Marsh and Collier Land Associates and its predecessor entities took 4 months. Elizabeth did not follow every step of it. She had a stopping house to run and an expanding operation that had grown beyond what she had originally planned because Roy Saunders had told other freighters about it, and other freighters had started routing their runs to pass through. And she had needed to hire 2 more women from the cottages, and had worked out with Gus a permanent arrangement for bunkhouse supplies to supplement the stopping house kitchen on heavy days. She had also fully repaid the repair loan to Caleb, down to the last cent in month 4. She put the final repayment on the kitchen table in the morning with a note that said simply, "Paid in full." He came down to breakfast, read the note, looked at her across the table. "You did not have to do it this fast," he said. "I know," she said. "The rate was fair. There was no pressure." "I know that too," she said. "I wanted it done." He picked up the note and folded it carefully and put it in his coat pocket. She watched him do it and felt something about that. About the fact that he kept it, that he put it somewhere it would travel with him, rather than setting it aside. "What are you going to do with it?" she said. He looked at her. "Keep it," he said. "Why? Because it is evidence," he said. "Of something I want to remember." She looked at him. "What?" He held her gaze. "That you did what you said you would do," he said. "Exactly what you said. From the beginning." She felt the weight of that. Not the money, the recognition. The specific thing it meant when someone who had been let down enough times to stop expecting it acknowledged, clearly and directly, that you had been the kind of person you said you were going to be. She looked at the table. "Caleb," she said. "Yes. I need to tell you something." He waited. She looked up at him. "When I came here," she said, "I was angry at you. You know that?" "Yes," he said. "And I was right to be. What you hid from me was significant. You should have told me." "I know," he said. "I am not angry anymore," she said. "I want you to know that. Not because I decided to let it go as a matter of convenience, or because I had nowhere else to go. Because I understand now why you did it, and because the months since then have shown me who you are in ways that the advertisement and the church and the first days could not have." He was very still. "I understand a man who built something enormous, and found that the thing he built, a wall like him between, and everyone might have actually seen him," she said. "I understand wanting one person who came for the right reasons. I understand it differently now than I did in the beginning." "Elizabeth, I am not finished," she said. Not unkindly. He stopped. "I built something here," she said. "Mine. With a loan from you that I have now repaid. I built it and I made it work, and I know that I can stand on my own because I have been doing it. That matters to me more than I can fully explain, but I have also been standing beside you for 6 months. And I have learned that standing beside you is different from standing beside anyone I have ever known." The kitchen was completely quiet. "You asked me once what we are," she said. "When I said we are harder to beat than Marsh thinks." "I remember," he said. "I think I have a better answer now," she said. He looked at her with the full open attention he gave, only to things that mattered most. The way he looked at the valley in the early morning. The way he looked at the ledger when the numbers told him something important. "We are a partnership," she said, "a real one, equal. And I would like it to stay that way." He stood up from the table. He was quiet for a moment, a long one. The kitchen held the sound of the ranch outside. The familiar sounds she had cataloged over 6 months until they had become the sound of her own life. And she waited in that sound and let him take the time he needed. He crossed to her side of the table. He stood in front of her. He put out his hand, open, palm up, the way you offer something, rather than the way you take something. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, not tightly, just with the steady, intentional warmth of a man who understood the difference between holding on and holding. "Equal," he said. "Equal," she said. They stood like that in the kitchen while the morning came fully through the windows and the ranch outside went about its work, and Martha moved somewhere in the back of the house with characteristic tact, making enough noise to ensure her presence was known and her interruption avoided. That evening, for the first time since Elizabeth had arrived at Thornton Ranch, they sat together on the front porch as the last light left the valley. Not because someone suggested it, not because it was planned. Simply because they both walked toward the same door at the same time and neither of them stopped. The valley below them was the same valley Elizabeth had first seen from a wagon seat. The place that had seemed to her in that first moment like evidence of a deception. She looked at it now and saw something so different from that first impression that it was hard to believe she was the same woman who had sat in that wagon with $4.60 and a single bag and a name she had not yet learned to answer to. She thought about the advertisement. Honest work. Steady home. She had thought it was small. She had thought it described a modest life. She understood now that he had been describing exactly what he meant. The honesty had been complicated, but it had been real. The home had been larger than she expected, but it had also been real. And the work, the actual work she had done here, with her hands and her mind and her notebook and her stubbornness, and her particular way of paying attention to things other people thought were too small to matter, that had been the most real of all. Caleb sat beside her in the other chair, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the evening cold. "The investigator's report will be complete by spring," she said. "Fitch says the same," he said. Marsh will not recover from it, she said. Not in this territory. No, he said. The Hendersons may have grounds for recovery on the land sale. Fitch thinks so. She nodded. They were quiet for a while. The stopping house will need to expand before summer, she said. The traffic volume is going to exceed what I can manage in the current space. I know, he said. There is land adjacent that could be cleared without affecting the pasture. She looked at him. You thought about it. I noticed the traffic, he said. I pay attention to things. She looked back at the valley. I will need another loan, she said. No, he said. She turned. He was looking at the valley, too. It is not a loan, he said. Whatever the stopping house needs to grow is a joint investment. Equal contribution. Equal return. She held her breath for a moment. You said equal, he said simply. I am taking you at your word. She let the breath out. All right, she said. They sat in the last light together, and the valley went slowly dark below them, and the lanterns came on in the worker cottages, one by one, and the stopping house at the northeast corner was the last building she could see before the dark fully took it, its windows holding the amber of an inside lamp that Hannah must have left burning. She had arrived here as a woman with nothing, willing to work for a roof and a purpose. She had built something of her own and paid back every cent of what it took to build it. She had helped protect 4,000 acres and 38 workers and the families in those cottages from a man who had come very close to getting what he wanted. She had learned the difference between a man who hides what he has out of fear and a man who deceives. And she had learned it not through what Caleb said, but through what he did. Day after day, in the particular accumulation of small honest actions that build a person's real character when they think nobody is watching. She had discovered that, standing beside someone, truly beside them, did not diminish what she had built alone. It made it mean more. Caleb's hand moved across the space between the chairs and rested beside hers on the arm. Not touching, just present, just close, the way he approached everything important. Carefully, without force, leaving the choice to her. She moved her hand to cover his. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. The valley was dark, and the lanterns burned steadily in the cold, and the ranch breathed around them with the deep settled rhythm of something that had been here a long time and intended to be here long still. Elizabeth Harper had walked into a church with nothing and had come out the other side as someone she had not known she could be. She had not been saved by Caleb Thornton's money, or his land, or his name. She had been given a key, and she had opened the door herself. And everything on the other side of it she had built with her own hands. That was the only story that had ever been worth telling. And it was entirely, completely, and without qualification her own.